Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me here today. I am coming back to make regular videos. However, I decided that I was going to do a little something different for just this video. I'll be back to doing comic books normally. But I wanted to have a one sided conversation, basically, just giving you my opinion and then seeing if you guys agree or disagree. So, the question is Jim Lee the most influential, not the best, influential penciler ever? Now, the reason I don't say best is because art is subjective. You may think Jim Lee is the best. You may think Todd McFarlane's the best. You may think Jack Kirby's the best. It doesn't matter. My question is influence. Is he the most influential penciler of all time? So I'm showing you this image here from Punisher War Journal 15 with Punisher. This is not where we're going to get to, okay? This is just a nice little image that I just kind of wanted to put out here as we start. And I'll ask the question again, is he the most influential penciler ever? First, I want to say that this is a great image. I actually have this issue. I tore off the cover and threw away the issue. He didn't draw the inside. He did do this cover, and I have this cover, and I absolutely love it. So when I say art is subjective, this is what I mean. This is Salvador Dali. Is this good art? Certainly is famous. This piece certainly will set you back millions of dollars. It is well known. Is this good art? Here's Jackson Pollock. Is this good art? Is this, a... So when I say again, is Jim Lee the greatest? It's subjective. Again, Andy Warhol here. Is this good art? Is he the best? Is he the greatest? Is it Leonardo da Vinci? So, again, I'm not asking is he the greatest. So, I'm going to get to my point now. I'm going to show you a couple of comic books that I'm going to call before Jim Lee. These are going to be from the 80s. I'm going to show you both Marvel and DC. I'm going to take a look real quick here. 1984. This is way before Jim Lee. Well, not way, but a few years before Jim Lee. Okay? We're going to be looking at pencils by David Mazzucchelli. This is a lot faster than I go to. I just want you to look at the art. Okay? Just look at the art. Now, we all know David Mazzucchelli ends up doing year one. This isn't the point that I'm trying to make. Everybody evolves. This is, I think, his very early work. But I want you to just see what Marvel was kind of looking when you bought a comic book. It wasn't just Marvel. So, if you want, we moved 10 issues in the future. You can see David Mazzucchelli really has improved. But again, that's not the point that I'm trying to make here. These are digital copies, not digital. Taken from the actual comic book. So when you went in the kind of early to mid 80s, this is sort of what you would get. So, same year, 1984, we're looking at the Avengers. You can see here, Al Milgrom is our penciler. It's kind of funny. I think of Al Milgrom as an inker. So, 1984. And when you got a comic book, again, this is sort of what they looked like. We're moving a year ahead. This is 1985. This is Iron Man, of course. So, Mark Bright, who recently passed away, again, you're getting my point. We're going to look at a couple more, just briefly, kind of like this. And then you tell me if Jim Lee is the most influential penciler of all time. Let's look at DC. Here's 1986. This is, I believe, Jim Starlin doing the art. So again, we're pre-Jim Lee, we're pre-Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane was a big person too that changed the game. This is 1987, and Jim Lee is actually starting to be in the game. But again, just really showing you what we're looking at here. Let's look at one of my favorites from the 80s, Firestorm. I think he's the best designed character ever. I just can't think of anybody cooler. I really wish someone could really revive this character, because this freaking character is so freaking cool. I mean, how can you not think that someone with a fire head is not cool? So again, this is kind of what you would look at in the 80s. Okay, so eventually we get Jim Lee. This is 1987. All right. We get a very unpolished Jim Lee learning the ropes. He's drawing pretty traditional. He's not inking himself, but it's pretty traditional. This is not his first issue, but it's one of the, Whilce Portacio is his inker. Whilce Portacio, of course, is an artist in his own right, but he started at Marvel as an inker. Okay. And so we got Wolverine, who, of course, everybody has seen sketches and stuff. I can't tell you what's going on because I have never, ever, ever, ever read this. So again, Jim Lee's early Jim Lee. All right. So you can see that he started sort of the same way that everybody else started. Look at this. I mean, you look at it, there's no hatching yet. So you look at this and you're like, no, whatever, right? You don't know who he's going to be. In fact, you don't see anything in here that tells you this dude's going to be, Jim Lee. Eventually, Jim Lee is giving Punisher War Journal. And he's not with Scott Williams is starting to come in, but he will not be with him all the time. Okay, so this is him and early Scott Williams. You can see the dynamicisms are getting in there. That's what I call them. Still looking good. It's much better than that Alpha Flight that you saw. So, Jim Lee is absolutely improving. Scott Williams is more of a traditional penciler. Sorry, inker at this time. That Scott Williams, Jim Lee that you're going to be used to hasn't arrived yet. In fact, I think this is their first collaboration together. He'd have a few different inkers on Punisher War Journal. But, you know, it's still not stuff that you're going to go, oh my goodness gracious. You know, but it's different, sort of, than some of the stuff that you've been seeing before. I'm going to show you another Punisher War Journal here. This is from '89. And Jim Lee is the artist. So he's doing both pencils and inks. Things are changing. You can definitely see. Definitely see the Jim Lee-isms that are going to start to come out. So it really probably wasn't very fair to compare the the mid 80s. This is 1989. So it's actually 5 years difference. Jim Lee is eventually given in 1989 a one issue of Uncanny X-Men, issue 248. You can see here a little bit of hashing. Dan Green is his inker here, but definitely a lot of you can start to see. Keep in mind, same year as Punisher War Journal, so his art quite hasn't evolved yet, but here we are. Of course, the girls or women that he draws. Here we start to see the hatching, right? It's coming. Eventually, he's given a 3-issue arc, and people just absolutely adored this. Scott Williams again. I believe this is 1990. So you can see where comic books were. So, about 1 year after, Jim Lee becomes the full-time penciler in Uncanny X-Men. Of course, everybody has seen this panel, or this page, sorry. And you can see the hatching, and that's where I want to get to. Because Jim Lee is basically, you can see the dynamic poses. We're going to be looking at his last issue of Uncanny X-Men before he launches X-Men. This is his last issue of Uncanny. And again, look. Hatching, 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 hatching. The Jim Lee era is about to go into overdrive. So, this is one of the things that Jim Lee starts to do is these you see it a lot in his Batman run. Again, look at all this hatching. Of course, in 1991, he releases X-Men #1. Hatching, 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 hatching. And a hell of a lot of hatching here. I don't know. If I was Scott Williams, then I know Scott Williams is paid very well. Again, hatching, hatching, hatching. Hatching, hatching, hatching. So he just does but he hung around with Jim Lee, but man, oh man, so much difference. Again, hatching, hatching, hatching. This is the final issue I'm going to show you. Because although Jim Lee actually stuck around till X-Men 11, I think this is one of the near ends where he actually drew his best. The rest of the issues, he's kind of mailing it in. He is, in fact, you can even see here, he just provides the breakdowns. So it's very difficult with Jim Lee during this time because he was trying to set up Image comic books. Again, look at this. Hatching, 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 hatching. And everything's just getting hatched to hell. So, again, Jim Lee, of course, eventually leaves Marvel, takes a few of his buddies with him, and they form Image Comics. I'm telling you, the before hatching Jim Lee is, to me, look at this. This is so beautiful. I prefer it. In fact, when he does, is it Death Blows on Image, where he was trying to imitate Frank Miller? Man, I love that version of Jim Lee. But I digress. So, what my point is, of course, he goes to Image Comics and comes up with a little title of his own. It is this one. Now, I'm going to be covering this ish. I'm going to be covering his run. But again, just look at the art. He really changes the things, but this, of course, was a huge success. Huge. And when Jim Lee left, he left a hole at Marvel Comics. So, how did the big two respond? Glad you asked. This is Detective Comics 676 from 1994. Kelly Jones is great, but he is not the penciler, although he did the cover. Hatch, 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 hatch. Hatching, hatching, hatching. I am positive that the powers that be told these artists copy Jim Lee, because there is a definite change in how everybody was. This is the worst era of Batman. And Batman's my favorite. It's the worst era. Again, hatch, hatch, hatch. Um, oh, Jim Lee. This, of course, isn't Jim Lee, but you cannot tell me that this isn't inspired completely. DC says this is 1993, and even DC Comics is like, draw Jim Lee. Of course, not everybody could quite do that, but you can definitely see a lot of hatching starting to get through. And of course, we get to the point where you can definitely see the imagisms where they started to try to copy Cable in a way, which I know is a Rob Liefeld thing. But again, look at this art style. Jim Lee-isms everywhere. This is what Marc Silvestri sort of drew like before Jim Lee. You can definitely tell Marc Silvestri was a great penciler. Absolutely amazing stuff. So this is Silvestri prior to Jim Lee. Kind of went back a little bit because I want to show you Silvestri after Jim Lee. Silvestri is a incredible storyteller, great penciler. This is the same art team, by the way. This is Silvestri after Jim Lee. This is the same inker as well. Don't tell me they didn't even tell Marc Silvestri to draw like Jim Lee. And I think perhaps maybe they didn't. Perhaps he did it himself because he says, this motherfucker sells well. Maybe I should do it. But hey, look, hatching, 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 hatching. Marc Silvestri. But so you got to see Marc Silvestri before and after. Don't tell me Jim Lee is not the most influential penciler of all time, who literally had Marc Silvestri, one of the best and other Image co-founder, change his style to draw just like him. Here's Andy Kubert taking after Jim Lee. Hatching, hatching, hatching. He does not draw like this. This isn't how he's classically trained. His father's Joe Kubert. But Jim Lee sold, so hey. Look at this. My goodness. Here's Uncanny X-Men. Again. Everybody draw like Jim Lee. Look at this. And this happened, so there's a reason that the 90s is considered one of the worst for comic books. Nobody drew like anything anymore. It's a complete change. And, not everybody could pull off Jim Lee. Here's the great Joe Quesada. Cover looks great. But if you don't believe me, there's Joe Quesada. Draw like Jim Lee, Joe. And he was starting over, or he was starting new, so he's probably like, okay. But again, hatching, hatching, hatching. That was the order of the day. I mean, nobody was immune. Here's John Romita Jr. Look at all this hatching. That's just not his. That's not his style. John Romita Jr. is absolutely phenomenal. But look at all this hatching. Look at Daredevil. So it wasn't just X-Men. You know, I know that I showed you a couple X-Men. You're like, well, no, duh. Jim Lee and X-Men. No, it's everybody. Now, Daredevil's a little bit of a darker character, so you can get away with laying probably a little bit more shadows. But even then, you can see that there was a definite... Look at all the hatching. Hatching, 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 hatching. So, even on dark characters like Daredevil, this hands down is the worst art of Captain America ever. Yep. Jim Lee, Jim Lee, Jim Lee. Everybody, it is... I am telling you, I sometimes call this the image effect. That maybe it was a cumulative effect on everyone, but telling you the house style of everybody try to draw like Jim Lee, and unfortunately, it just doesn't work with everybody. Everybody just started Jim Leeing this and hatching that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be leaving you with the question one more time. Jim Lee may not be, in your opinion, the greatest penciler of all time. Although I will be honest, I do love him. I find his pencils to be absolutely great. But, like I started in the beginning, that's not the question. Is Jim Lee the most influential penciler of all time? Because art styles were absolutely changed just for Jim Lee. Suddenly, everybody wanted to draw like Jim Lee. And the big two told everybody to draw like Jim Lee. So in the comments, if you'd like, just let me know. Let me know if you think he is the most influential. I think he is. I think that he changed for at least 10 years how everyone draws. I think eventually everything, like the market corrects itself. You hear that saying. Eventually, people started to bring their own style and all that kind of stuff. But how Jim Lee has changed the way people pencil, the way people do action, the way everything is done, hands down. If you think someone else has influenced and are the medium more than Jim Lee, I'd love to know that too. So, all right. I'll be back to doing my normal stuff. I just thought I'd do this a one-off here. Just thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about, in my opinion, one of the best pencilers ever of all time. So, like and subscribe, and I do thank you for listening. Goodbye.